Youth participation is the process by which young people make impacts in their community and drive differences. And I really became interested in this during the early months of the pandemic, during March and April of 2020, where we all underwent this anxiety and this stress and this pressure of having a pandemic looming over our lives. But I saw the differences and the changes that young people were making in this community and in communities across the United States and across the world, from making masks for healthcare workers to signing up for Instacart and DoorDash to deliver food and groceries to elderly folk. And through those processes, I was interested in how else young people were getting involved, how they were pursuing their passions and their interests and their goals during this time. And what I really wanted to do was talk to them, to connect with them, and to create ideas and values and goals that we could all try to live toward. And during this process and during this time, I worked on a podcast called Youthmatic, and I had a chance to connect with two very special individuals, Ria Goyle, who went on to write the Gen Z book and is currently a freshman at Barnard, who wrote this wonderful book about understanding our generation, understanding the process in which we grew up, understanding the political climate, the economic climate, and the social climate of not only having COVID-19, but also all of the other factors that are in our lives, from online school to this pandemic to the political and social structures that surround us. And Kaylee Looney, the founder of Reinvented Magazine, who works with women in STEM, and how she used her platform that she had as the founder of this magazine to raise girls in STEM and youth voices during this pandemic. And what I learned and realized was that connection is central in how we live and how we learn and how we go about our daily lives, and especially how we build our communities. And thinking about my community here in Eastmark, my community here at Basis Mesa, but also the communities I call a part of my home across the world, I wanted to look at how my community is affected by my identity, whether that be my age, my sex, my race, my religion, whatever those factors were for me or were for other people. I looked in at the youth population, and I saw that all of those different factors were affected by the pandemic, and we affected the pandemic. Essentially, the factors that make us who we are led us to push and strive to create change, whether that be young people working together to fight causes and make change in this time. And I think a central point of that is understanding where our identities come from, how they develop, and how COVID and this increased use of technology, the connections through Zoom, through having an access point to people around the world, led to changes in how we think about ourselves and think about our communities. And a large part of that is understanding diversity in opinion. So people aged 24 and younger make 40% of the world population. 40%, and that's almost half. But they're not represented in our government here in the United States, in governments abroad, or among non-governmental organizations. And that is a key factor in how we think about youth, as people who are striving to use social media to make a change, or striving to use other methods to make a change, but not the methods in which other generations are already making changes. And I think as a young person, it's often great to have my voices heard and my opinions heard, but also the idea of youth tokenism as being the only young person in the room, as being the only individual that people listen to, is often a detriment to young people as a whole, to Gen Zers as a whole. And during this process, I wanted to understand the youth voice, essentially looking at that diversity, looking at that 40% of the world population, and thinking about how those identities that we talked about before, how that the identities that developed during the pandemic, that were raised and created and changed during this stressful time, led to changes in how we think about not only our opinions and ideas and values, but how that affects our inner voice. And during my time as a fellow at PBS, I really worked on targeting the youth audience. I worked on two different projects, one on COVID and the college admissions process, and one on sex-based differences in cancer. And through both projects, even though they're in very, very different areas, I learned and saw how youth work and play and learn, and how groups form. My advisor would tell us, this is how you target the specific audience that you're trying to get at, how you get to the people who want to look at this video. And I thought about how those ideas and values and groups form. And at Basis Mesa, I was working on a senior project that looked at the political values of Indian Americans and how different demographic factors affected them. And the main conclusion I'd come to was that religion was this cleaving factor, was the key indicator in how people divided themselves into specific ethnic groups. So I wanted to take that idea and take that fact and apply it to the youth population and think about, how do youth divide ourselves? How do we form these groups? And think about what we need to do to create change and to solve the problems of today. Because climate change is a problem of today. The political issues we're facing is a problem of today. And all of these different economic and social factors that play a role in our lives are issues of today. As part of this young generation, people often tell me that you are the generation that's going to fix the problems of the generations before us. And playing a part in that, I feel honored, but also I feel nervous and stressful. It's a stressful process. And I think that understanding why these groups form and understanding how collaboration can take a part in it is important when we think about how we're going to solve the problems of tomorrow. And essentially the key question that guides us is, what divides us? When you look at the person right next to you, when you look at your neighbors, when you look at a student and their teachers and their classmates, what divides you from the person sitting right next to you? And how do you bridge those divisions, make linkages between groups, get past your specific in-group to drive and create social change, or drive and create environmental change, whatever change and difference that you want to make in the world? And lastly, the idea of inclusion draws all of us together. This is key in solving the problems of tomorrow, of bridging those gaps and having people who may not look like you or sound like you or think like you as part of your group, so that you have the opinions of people who have completely different experiences from you, or who have the same experience but have drawn different conclusions and ideas and values from those experiences. And lastly, without the principle of inclusion, we will not solve the problems of today. Thank you so very much.